everybody. Welcome to Strategy and Future. My name is Jacek Bartosiak, and today my guest, I should say my internal guest, is Marek Budzisz, head of our Eastern team, Eurasian team, Russia and China. Hello, Marek.
Hello, nice to meet you.
We will be discussing not only the activities of Russia in the eastern frontier and the eastern part of Europe, but most importantly, we want to talk about the broader subject. We want to talk about the Russian strategic culture. And the fact is that two Poles are going to speak English about the Russian strategic culture is the fact that we want to sort of convey the message, and we want to also participate in discussion how the Russian strategic culture evolves in recent years under the Putin's reign, under the Putin's rule, especially with Gerasimov and Serdyukov and Shoigu's reforms. And that will be a much broader discussion, touching on Garkov, on the strategic way of thinking since Peter the Great. But underpinning or underlying reason why we have decided to have this conversation is my guest's newest book, Wszystko jest wojną in Polish, about the Russian strategic culture. In English, I would translate into The War is Everywhere, or Everything is War, which itself explains sufficiently what will be the subject of our conversation. Marek, pardon me for this lengthy introduction, but I wanted our listeners to understand the context. So why did you decide to give this title to your book? And why did you write this book in the first place?
So I was thinking, what is what is organizing the Russian elite thinking about the role of the state, about the international relations, and about the policy of Russia. And in my opinion, is a unique culture with roots in the 19th century and maybe earlier. And this unique culture I describe using the term strategic culture, because that's a framework which creates how the Russian elite understand the world, understand their role, and understand how should react to the accidents. And of course, I wanted to avoid avoid the situation that the West, mainly speaking, is all the times surprised by Russian actions. That's in my opinion the lack of the understanding, the result of the lack of the understanding, their motives.
The most fundamental conclusion that the reader has after reading the book is that the Russians are really perfect at aligning the hard power, soft power, smart power, control of the narrative, strategic messaging, posturing, signaling. How does that work? How did they come to combine all those layers of international posturing into the one compact toolbox of foreign policy that we can witness in recent years? How did it happen? When did it start? Did it start already in the Soviet Union? Could you tell us a little bit more about it?
I think that even earlier, because if we analyzing the works of Russia strategic thinkers, we can see the very obvious roots with imperial period, with the authors of working during the imperial period, not only Russia but also Prussia. In my opinion, even it's possible to say that Russia is the last probably country in the world which embodied the Prussian style of thinking how the state and the army should be organized and cooperate in the policy.
You also sort of, but let's give our viewers some names. Did it start with Ogarkov, with Kokoshkin? You know, what sort of milieu, uh, what sort of security community within Soviet Union initiate this debate about because it's all about the changing the paradigm, right? The revolution, military affairs, and the information revolution that creates the need for the information dominance at the battlefield and broader, in the broader sense, political struggle. Just let's introduce some names so that we could really
Yes.
follow the.
I think that the roots are even deeper, or even earlier. We can find some roots of today thinking. Let's concentrate a little bit about the reception of Clausewitz's works in Russia, and also of Moltke the Elder. Because it should be mentioned that the Moltke the Elder was, even during the Stalin regime times, twicely published. And in the 20s and 30s, there was in Russia a very important internal discussion how to organize, what does it mean, the strategy at the state level. Mainly speaking, there was two camps. The one which is connected with Tukhachevsky fought the same way as Moltke the Elder, that the state strategy finishing when the war is starting. The military efforts are the unique field of activity of the soldiers, of the officers. But from the political point of view, the state should be active after the success in a field. The opposite point of view, connected with, for example, Frunze and also Shaposhnikov, and also with Siechin and Iserson, they fought, frankly speaking, repeating what Lenin told about the famous citation of Clausewitz, that the word is a tool of the politics. They thought that all the stages, before the war, during the war, and after the war, should be managed by the political center of the state. And all these phases, before the conflict, after the conflict, and during the conflict, are the realm of the policy. Everything should be controlled by politicians, and the army, the war, is one of the tools of the policy. The result of this way of thinking was that the difference between the peace and the war is not so
distinct, yeah,
important, distinctive in Russian way of thinking as in European one. The crossing the border between the peace and the war is not so important step as we are thinking. That's in my opinion, the main conclusion of this attitude. The result of this way of thinking was the attempt to create the strategic leadership of the state. The group of the people who are thinking about the role of the country on the international level as well as on the internal level. And we are using different tools. One of them is a military power as a tool of the policy.
Mm. That's important to note, that this calibration between the military means and the political objectives was being very thoroughly conceptualized. And then we, just to moving forward, Fast forward to the 70s and 80s of the 20th century, the Soviets already realized that they cannot match the US technology prowess. And they started conceptualizing the coming revolution in military affairs and the technological effect on the battlefield, along with the information dominance, as I understand from your book. But as opposed to the US tendency to focus on technology only, they were focusing on art, military art, how it would be evolving. So tell us more about this, this group of people that were thinking about it, and as I understand later on, were showing up themselves in some political circles during Yeltsin times and Putin's times, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, that's a long story, of course, but briefly speaking, briefly describing, at the end of the 60s, when the Soviet thinkers thought that the nuclear parity with United States was achieved. That was approximately in 1969, as I remember. They start thinking that if if America and Russia have the potential to annihilate themselves each other, then the growing importance should be put to the traditional way of concluding the military conflicts, because the threat of using the nuclear, of using the nukes is so high that nobody will pass this border. That means that relatively the traditional army, traditional strategy will be more important in the near future. They start thinking in the 60s about the partisan war, about the proxy war, about other wars, not resembling the Second World War. They were trying to find a new way of war, just to achieve the political goals. That was the first step. The second step, in 70s, as well as in KGB and also in the army, they have, in my opinion, the perfect knowledge about the differences of potential between Soviet Union and America. And they have, of course, that the politicians, as lately General Vasiliev, chef of the special KGB unit to assess the situation, told, the politicians didn't understand the situation. But the guys at the level of general staff, at the level of special KGB unit, they have the perfect knowledge that from the economical point of view, Soviet Union is much weaker than America. And then they wanted to start reanalyzing and rethinking the strategy, how to create a new tool and new way of warfare to be able to answer the Reagan initiative of Star Wars. At the beginning of 90s, there was established a special, let's say, think tank affiliated with the Institute of United States and Canada, under the patronage of Yakovlev, which was later the partner of Gorbachev in Gorbachev perestroika. They start thinking about the asymmetrical answer to the Reagan Star Wars initiative. And this the school of redefining all the traditional attitude start at the beginning of the 90s in Russia. Mr. Kokoshin was one of them, active. Mr. Garyev, who is a cooperator of Chief of General Staff Ogarkov. That was the roots are there. They start thinking based on three principles. First, that the Soviet Union is much weaker from the economical point of view. Second, nuclear conflict could be avoided. That means that the traditional way of warfare will be more important. Third, the strategically Soviet Union should find the answer to the American supremacy, and they found this new attitude, which we call nonlinear war, or war of the lower intensity. Let's sometimes hybrid one. That was in 20 years before Mr. Gerasimov described it publicly.
That's also a good moment to underline, and this is important for our Western listeners, that the Soviet Union was facing a major collapse that was coming. It depopulated. I mean, Russia depopulated compared to the Soviet Union. And also the battlefield paradigm was shifting already in the 80s. So the mass armies were not longer needed. And it appeared at that time that they would not be longer needed. And because for the last 200 years, Russia was needed for the Western powers to balance the other Western powers in the grand game over control of Europe, mostly because of the pull of recruits and the manpower in war. Russia was about to lose its main edge, its main leverage, along with a change in the paradigm and on the battlefield. So I understand that they were trying to conceptualize this change that would, of course, diminish the leverage that Russians have. And it really deleveraged Russia a lot. So as we know, today's battlefield is completely different. You don't need the mass, concentrate mass. And actually, it's dispersal and very brief concentration of firepower that is relying on the information dominance and sensors, which Russia has been technologically always not having in excess. So would you expand on that a little bit, Marek, because this is important, that Russia is not bringing to the table today the mass armies to be a partner in the European balancing game, as some in the West are thinking, but at the same time, it learned the lesson and then translate this lesson into the new type of war that is called the new generation warfare in the West, or hybrid warfare. Would you expand on this particular topic?
I think that we can say even more, because if we read carefully, for example, the interviews of General Vasiliev, which was a head of the special analytical unit of KGB, he openly described that they have internally the perfect knowledge that Russia is not able to go with America if we are talking about the military potential, and but the politicians didn't accept this this attitude, and that was the reason why the Soviet Union at the end of the day collapsed. Today the situation is different, because today the political class of Russia not only want to hear, but also want to implement this attitude. That means that because of the evolution of the military art, because of the creation of the new domains, the army, that there is no necessity to have such a big army as in the Soviet times. There is also not necessity to have such a big burden on the economic burden on the economy to keep in this army. And also, as well, there is no need to have the ambitions to be the world superpower. Taking all this together, the army is much more compacted, much more modernized, more active, but also the political goals in which the army could be used are not so broad as during the communist times. They are more fit to the today's dimension of Russia and the today's potential of Russia. These ambitions are limited. This attitude is different. The pressure as a result of this attitude, the pressure to the neighboring countries could be and is more is higher than during the communist time.
So let's summarize this particular topic. I mean, what sort of policy tool the Russian army is and how it fits into the broader toolbox of policy instruments. And let's do it on the particular case of Ukraine and the tension now between Russia and Ukraine. So it's not a mass army against the NATO. It is to fight in the neighborhood, first of all. So short logistical lines, high combat readiness, as opposed to the reservist-backed army territorial defense that was during the Soviet times. Combat readiness, deployment, and efficiency and mobility, but at a much smaller scale, right?
Yes, but also very precisely used.
Exactly. Plus a very sophisticated toolbox of political pressuring, political signaling, intimidation, a lot of diplomatic economic tools, positioning the enemy in the corner, while the army is just maneuvering as it was in and I hope it's a good comparison, in the 18th century wars. So the armies were marching, maneuvering, and it was sort of a cabinet war to intimidate the enemy and exploit concessions, so to speak. So this is exactly what the new type of war, the Russian type of war, is all about, right, Marek?
Yes, I think that there are, of course, two main pillars of this attitude. The first is that the army and the potential of this tool is crucial to the successful foreign policy. That doesn't mean that the army should be used or will be used in each potentially conflicting situation. But the possession of the army is crucial to be able to have the sovereign foreign policy. And the second pillar is the ability to control the escalation ladder. Escalation ladder in the Russian strategic thinking is very sophisticated and very precisely described when we are using the tools which are treated as a non-military one, and if the rival is not changing his behavior or not changing his policy, we are making the next steps, even if it's necessary to use the military pressure. Of course, that will be made, but under some conditions. If the first steps, intimidation, narrative, economic one, political, special forces, all this described many times. If if they are using these tools and they are not observing the attitude from the other side as they expected should be, then they are ready and will use more pressure, even using the military pressure, even sending the troops, as we are observing just now in the Ukrainian case.
You know, so it's all about the the battle for perception, as opposed to the battle of the will, of course, as opposed to the battle of kinetic forces. We might even assume that using the kinetic force is a sort of a loss, I mean, or a defeat of this sophisticated strategy.
Yes, but not excluding the using the kinetic forces, not excluding, and relatively easy crossing the border. Much easier than in our understanding. That's also my opinion.
Trust, plus all the additional elements kick in again. Deception, maskirowka, intimidation, a lot of things that are like a propaganda warfare or disinformation warfare. Information used as a weapon and positioning the enemy in a bad spot. And not like in a simplistic version that, you know, the enemy is a bad guy or something, but by creating a lot of unnerving developments that create the strategic narrative, right? Let's talk about the strategic narrative. That's a notion, that's a concept that you also introduced in your book. What does that mean in the Russian mindset?
Briefly speaking, it's how we described our goals, how we create understanding of the other world, of our policy, and the arguments, and our attitude, just to have the situation when the rival accepting our approach. That's the crucial point, because the military or the political victory is not enough. The ideal situation from the Russia perspective is that the rival is accepting and accepting internally their attitude, their arguments. And of course, if you are talking the escalation ladder, for example, let me use one example. Mr. Lukashenko is openly told in one of the interview that when he talked with Putin and Shoigu about the Debaltsevo battle, they were deeply disappointed because of the result, because the Russian army triumph was, in their opinion, too high. That the Ukraine was beaten too hard to be able to be ready to accept the results. That's help us to understand how they are thinking. This military tool should be very precisely used, because the weaker side should accept the results. And that's the crucial. The acceptance of the results by the weaker side is a guarantee for final Russia success. That's why Russia is so stubbornly in the Donetsk, Normandy format negotiations, because they want to achieve the acceptance of the Ukraine, of the new status quo. That's the final of the political process. Not the war is a final. The final is in policy and in the acceptance of the results.
Okay, so having said all this, and just in descriptive terms, painting the picture of the Russian strategic culture, its military these days, you know, let's focus now towards the end of our conversation, Marek, about how to defeat the new Russian type of war. Let's focus how a country like Poland, countries here close to Russia or NATO, should defeat and should approach this emerging problem?
First of all is to understand the Russian attitude. The second, if the military component is crucial, is Russia's strategy. That means that the answer should be also on this field.
So this is the center of gravity of the Russian foreign policy, so to speak, and the Russian strength. It's armed.
Yes, because
armed
the Russians
forces
understand the power, not the description of the power, of the description of the intentions. Of course, that's also important aspects of policy. But at the end of the day, they understand the power. They understand the power and not only the ability to use the power, but also the cineverse of the elites to use the power. If elites of the West are divided, if they don't want to use the power or thinking that that's a last retort tool, that means that their potential ability to protect is at the lower level.
So, if Clausewitz was right, and you always need to eliminate the enemy's center of gravity, so the Russian center of gravity is what? It's military. And in order to
military and controlling escalation ladder. That's the second aspect of this. We should have military potential. We should inform them openly that there are red lines crossing them. We will use military power, and we should have the ability to control at few levels the escalation ladder, just to block the possibility that they will escalate their their goals.
Yeah, and for our listeners and viewers to know, at Strategy and Future, we run the project of the Polish New Dog Force or New Model Army, whatever you call it, however you translate from Polish. When we are thinking about fielding such force, that would be a transformational force from the legacy force of the old era that we have today to this completely new dog force that will be addressing this dire need of which we have been talking now. We need to field a force that will control a few steps on the escalation ladder, effectively knocking out the Russian escalation dominance. And it seems to be doable and viable and affordable, most importantly. But the first step is to understand how Russians are thinking, what your strategic culture is. And again, this book, for the time being only in Polish, but I hope soon it will be in English, will help you guide through it. So through this process. And every victory starts with the mindset and understanding of your enemy. So that's a good starter. So Marek, what do you think? What will be, just ending our conversation, what will be, understanding the Russian toolbox? What will be the Russian next move?
I think that Russia will increase the pressure on the Ukraine and will test the how the West will respond. But what is new in this operation we see just now? I think that Putin and his colleagues want to solve all the problems simultaneously. All the problems, I mean the problems with Belarusia, the problems with Ukraine, and the problems with internal opposition, I mean Navalny and his political partners. They want to create the such high level of pressure and tensions with the West to one day, probably in the next few months, to have all the realize all the goals which they have. incorporating and controlling military, political, economically Belarusia, vassalize Ukraine, and killing Navalny and his and internal opposition. That's in my opinion the goal of the Kremlin.
And since we discussed the Russian center of gravity, so my understanding from what you were saying is that the West center of gravity, it's so I mean the objective, the target that Russians are hitting or striking, is the lack of cohesion between the Western countries. And these days, what does West mean? You know, in that respect, is it US or France and Germany? And that's a critical understanding that we are having these days in Poland. And I think we also shift to a new paradigm. And the same as the previously experience of the Belarusian summer in 2020, this is a transformational experience for our understanding what Poland is about to do this time around. If we see the cohesion of the West cracking and not being capable of effectively contain Russians' behavior. So let me just conclude by the last question. Do you think that things will change if, for any reason, Putin will be gone? What will happen to the Russian strategy culture?
That depends when he will gone and as a result of what of the process. If this will be the natural solution, let's say the problem, this transition period will be different than when will he gone because of the political tensions. But if let me also mention what you told about the cohesion of the West. I think that at the bottom of the problem, it's not a question of the cohesion, of the question of internal perception of Russia behavior, and mostly of what kind of the reaction the West should answer this Russia actions. In my opinion, the West capitals internally don't believe that there will be one day maybe a possibility to use the military force to stop the Russia, and that's the question. Their volatility in this sphere. And in my opinion, the answer of the situation is that the neighboring countries of the Russia, I mean Poland, Ukraine, Sweden, Finland, Romania, frankly speaking, if we compare the economic demographic potential of this countries taken together, there is not much lower than Russia one, and that the only solution is to cooperate much more closely than before, just to stop the hostile actions of the Russia. I'm deeply skeptical if France or even Berlin will help us with it.
Okay, let's then conclude with this sobering observation and a message that we realize what is going on here. Thank you. My guest was Marek Budzisz, Strategy and Future, and my name, Jacek Bartosiak, also Strategy and Future. And you stay tuned to more Strategy and Future episodes on strategy. Thanks a lot. Thanks, Marek.
Thanks.